The blood of Christ, the key to forgiveness and cleansing. Text, Hebrews 9 verse 22. Introduction. The book of Hebrews is a rich and complex epistle that explores the superiority of Jesus Christ over the Old Testament system of sacrifice and priesthood. In chapter 9, the author of Hebrews discusses the significance of blood in the Old Testament sacrificial system and how it points to the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ. In Hebrews 9 verse 22, we read, "In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness." This verse highlights the central importance of blood in the Old Testament system of sacrifice and forgiveness. But it also points to the limitations of that system and the need for a more perfect and permanent solution to the problem of sin. The Old Testament system of sacrifice. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were required to offer sacrifices to atone for their sins. These sacrifices were offered on a regular basis, and they involved the shedding of blood. The idea behind these sacrifices was that the blood of the animal represented the life of the animal, and that by shedding its blood, the Israelites were symbolically offering their own lives to God as a substitute for their sin. However, this system of sacrifice had its limitations. For one thing, it was repetitive and temporary. The Israelites had to offer sacrifices on a regular basis, because the sacrifices themselves did not provide permanent forgiveness. Furthermore, the Old Testament system of sacrifice was limited in its scope. It could only provide forgiveness for unintentional sins, and it could not provide forgiveness for deliberate and willful sins. The blood of Christ? But the blood of Christ is different. It is not just a symbol of life, but it is the very life of God Himself. When Jesus shed His blood on the cross, He was not just offering a symbolic sacrifice, but He was offering Himself as a real and permanent substitute for our sin. The blood of Christ is also unique in its power to cleanse and forgive. Unlike the Old Testament sacrifices, which could only provide temporary and limited forgiveness, the blood of Christ provides permanent and complete forgiveness for all our sins. As the author of Hebrews says in Hebrews 9 verse 14, "How much more, then, will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God?" The implications of the blood of Christ. So what are the implications of the blood of Christ for our lives? First and foremost, it means that we have been forgiven for our sins. The blood of Christ has cleansed us from all our sins, and we are now free to live a life of obedience and service to God. Secondly, it means that we have been cleansed from the guilt and shame of our sin. The blood of Christ has washed us clean, and we are now free to live a life of confidence and joy. Finally,